Cork Brennan remained still, his gaze fixed on the wooden door that plunged into the earth like a tombstone. Behind him, 15 neighbors had formed a semicircle, their laughter slicing through the afternoon air like shards of glass. The odd chimney pipes protruding from his land resembled metallic headstones, marking something long buried. Yet Cork wasn't burying anything. He was safeguarding the future. The very hands mocking his vision would soon be begging for access to what lay beyond that underground door. They called him insane, reckless, a fool digging his own demise. What they failed to see was that he was digging their deliverance. Malcolm Westridge stepped forward, his costly boots crunching on the upturned soil. 3 months ago, Cork had begun this excavation, defying every farming custom the valley had clung to for generations, while other ranchers built barns stretching toward the sky. Cork poured his life savings into digging downward, constructing something beyond the community's comprehension. "You've lost your mind," Malcolm pronounced, his voice heavy with the authority of the man who owned the largest estate in Millfield Valley. "A barn belongs above ground where crops can thrive. What you've built down there is nothing but an overpriced root cellar." The crowd muttered in agreement. Elena Vasquez, the valley's only veterinarian for 50 miles, stayed quiet near the back, her dark eyes scrutinizing Cork's intricate ventilation system. She saw details others missed: the precise angles of the air shafts, the moisture control systems, the temperature-regulating pipes, hints of technology far beyond a simple storage space. "Show us this miracle," Malcolm said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "Open those doors and let us see what thousands of dollars buried underground actually look like." Cork's weathered hands shook slightly as they grasped the door handle. 6 months of relentless labor, neighbors' ridicule, and the entirety of his savings had led to this moment. The heavy wooden door groaned as it opened, revealing stairs that disappeared into the meticulously controlled darkness below. "Once you see what's down there," Cork said softly, his voice steady despite the burning humiliation in his chest, "you'll understand why I built it, but understanding doesn't always mean believing." Malcolm laughed harshly, the sound bouncing off the surrounding hills. "The only thing we'll understand is that you've built yourself the priciest grave in Colorado." As Cork took the first step down, the crowd pressed closer, eager to witness the spectacle they were sure would be his downfall. None could imagine that within 3 months, every single one of them would be standing at these same stairs, no longer mocking, but pleading for entry. The stairs plunged 20 feet into the earth, each step resonating in the carefully engineered environment Cork had spent months perfecting. The air grew noticeably cooler, stabilizing at a precise 58 degrees. Malcolm's confident smirk faltered when he realized the air wasn't stale or musty like a typical cellar. It was fresh, meticulously circulated. Cork flipped a switch, and LED lights bathed the underground space in a clear, bright glow that defied every expectation. The facility stretched nearly 100 feet, its reinforced concrete walls lined with simple yet sturdy wooden shelving. Basic ventilation pipes ensured steady airflow, while modest thermostats regulated heating units. Carefully designed air circulation maintained proper moisture levels, creating ideal conditions for long-term crop storage. Yet what stunned the observers most was the sheer abundance. Row after row of preserved vegetables, grains, and dried goods filled every shelf. Corn, wheat, potatoes, beans, and dozens of other crops from Cork's bountiful harvest were perfectly stored in the controlled environment. The facility alone could feed 20 families through a harsh winter. "Sweet Jesus," whispered Tom Morrison, the hardware store owner, eyes wide. "Cork, this is unbelievable," Malcolm said, his face flushing with a mix of embarrassment and jealousy. His above-ground barns could never achieve this level of preservation. During the previous winter's unexpected freeze, he'd lost nearly 30% of his stored crops. This underground system removes that risk entirely. "Lucky harvest this year," Malcolm added dismissively, though his words lacked conviction. "Any fool can store crops when conditions are perfect." Elena stepped forward, examining the ventilation shafts more closely. Though simple, the air passages provided consistent circulation, and the temperature gauges kept track of every corner of the facility. Cork hadn't just built a storage space. He'd engineered a preservation system based on proven underground principles, adapted for small-scale farming. "The real test comes when growing seasons fail," Malcolm continued, desperate to assert his authority. "When drought strikes or frost wipes out crops, your fancy hole in the ground won't matter if there's nothing to store." Cork remained silent, his hand brushing a monitoring panel. The digital displays confirmed optimal conditions throughout the facility. What Malcolm failed to grasp was that this wasn't merely about storage, it was about survival. Weather patterns were becoming increasingly unpredictable, and traditional farming methods weren't keeping pace. Besides, Malcolm added with renewed confidence, you've probably spent more building this than most of us earn in 3 years. When winter passes normally like it always does, you'll see you've wasted every penny. The crowd murmured in agreement, their initial awe fading under Malcolm's logic as they began filing back toward the stairs. Impressed but unconvinced, most had dismissed Cork's underground innovation as unnecessary. Elena, however, lingered, studying the sophisticated monitoring equipment with growing unease. Above them, dark clouds gathered on the western horizon. The Weather Service had been issuing warnings about an unusually severe winter approaching, but most farmers in Millfield Valley brushed off the alerts as media hype. Malcolm turned for one last jab. Mark my words, Brennan. Come spring, you'll be the fool who buried a fortune underground while the rest of us thrived on common sense. Elena, meanwhile, checked the barometric pressure on Cork's monitoring system. The numbers made her blood run cold. 6 weeks later, the first weather alerts arrived on every phone. The National Weather Service issued unprecedented warnings for Millfield Valley and surrounding regions. An Arctic system unseen in over 40 years was forming. Models predicted sustained sub-zero temperatures for up to 3 months, with wind chills reaching deadly levels. During the weekly farmers' meeting at Donnie's Diner, Malcolm waved off the forecasts. Weather people have been wrong more than right. Remember last year's predicted drought? We had the wettest spring in decades. Besides, my family has farmed this valley for 3 generations. We know winter. Most of the valley's 22 farming families nodded, reassured by tradition. They'd survived harsh winters before, including the brutal freeze of 1978. Above-ground barns, propane heaters, and careful rationing had always sufficed. Cork sat quietly in a corner booth, scrolling through weather updates on his phone while comparing them to his simple thermometer readings from the underground facility. The modest monitoring system confirmed temperature stability that matched the Weather Service's forecasts. His facility could maintain cool, dry conditions no matter how extreme the weather outside became. Yet Cork hesitated, unsure how to warn his neighbors without seeming boastful. Elena approached, her experience as a veterinarian giving her a unique perspective on animal behavior. The livestock have been acting odd for weeks, she said softly. Horses are growing thicker coats earlier than usual. Cattle are clustering more than normal. Even the deer are moving to lower elevations. Animals sense changes in atmospheric pressure better than any forecast. They do, Cork replied, showing her his monitoring data, and these readings suggest the Weather Service may be underestimating just how severe this winter will be. Outside Donnie's windows, the late October sky carried a heavy, oppressive gray. Aspens had shed their leaves 3 weeks early, and the first hard freeze had arrived nearly a month ahead of schedule. Traditional farming wisdom might dismiss these as anomalies, but Cork's data revealed a clear, troubling pattern. Malcolm overheard and sauntered over. Still playing with your expensive toys, Brennan? My grandfather farmed this valley for 60 years without computers telling him how to store grain. Common sense beats technology every time. Your grandfather never faced a winter like the one coming, Cork said calmly. Atmospheric conditions are aligning perfectly. When it hits, traditional storage methods won't be enough. Prove it, Malcolm challenged, his voice echoing across the diner. You're so confident in your underground bunker. Let's make this interesting. If winter passes like every other, you admit your system was a waste. But if this super winter actually hits, I'll apologize to you publicly, in front of everyone. The diner went silent. Every farmer in Millfield Valley understood the gravity of such a public wager. Malcolm's reputation as the region's most successful rancher made his word carry enormous weight. Cork studied his face, noting the arrogance that could prove deadly if his predictions were right. And if you're wrong about this winter being normal, Cork added, you'll help distribute food to the families who need it. Deal, Malcolm said confidently, extending his hand. Because I know exactly how this is going to end. As they shook hands, Cork's tablet chimed with an emergency weather alert. The Arctic system had intensified beyond all projections, and the first wave was set to arrive in 72 hours. The storm hit Millfield Valley on November 15th at 3 in the morning. Cork's monitoring system had tracked the approach for hours, but nothing could have prepared the community for its fury. Temperatures plummeted from 38 down to 12 degrees in under 6 hours, with wind speeds exceeding 70 miles per hour. Cork stood in his underground facility, watching his simple yet effective systems maintain perfect stability as chaos unfolded above. The temperature inside remained a steady 55 degrees, humidity levels consistent, and his crops safely preserved while the world above turned into a frozen wasteland. Malcolm's confidence began to crack as his propane heaters failed to keep his above-ground barns warm enough. By dawn, ice crystals were forming on his stored grain, and moisture in his vegetables was creating dangerous spoilage conditions. Traditional storage methods, effective during normal winters, proved entirely inadequate against the unprecedented cold. Elena received her first emergency call at sunrise. The Hendricks family's cattle were showing severe cold stress, huddled together in their barn while feed froze solid. She drove through the blizzard in her modified truck, chains grinding against ice-covered roads that had become nearly impassable. By noon, the power grid had failed across 3 counties. Emergency generators at the hospital and fire station kept critical services running, but most homes and farms lost electricity completely. Without powered heating, conventional storage facilities became death traps for crops. Cork's underground facility, however, ran on a backup generator and propane heating system installed during construction. The natural insulation of the earth stabilized temperature, reducing fuel usage, and his redundant systems proved essential when all conventional power sources failed. Malcolm's pride initially prevented him from admitting the crisis, but when his prize cattle began showing signs of hypothermia, reality could no longer be ignored. 3 of his storage barns had lost structural integrity, and ice damage was destroying thousands of dollars of grain. By evening, Cork's monitoring system indicated the storm was only intensifying. Weather Service updates warned that the Arctic system would persist for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer if atmospheric conditions didn't shift, an unprecedented event in recorded history. At 8 a.m., Elena knocked on Cork's door, exhaustion etched into her face. 7 families have already lost their winter food supplies, she reported. The Morrison family's root cellar flooded when pipes burst. The Ricks lost half their grain to ice. Malcolm's cattle are in serious danger. Cork studied his tablet, showing abundant food perfectly preserved in his underground facility. His system could feed the entire valley for months, but distributing aid required careful planning and cooperation. How many families? He asked quietly. 2 households, nearly 100 people, including children and elderly residents who won't survive prolonged shortages. Outside, wind howled and temperatures continued falling toward record-breaking lows. 3 days into the storm, emergency services declared Millfield Valley a disaster zone. Roads remained impassable despite snowplows working non-stop, and supply trucks couldn't traverse the treacherous mountain passes. The valley was effectively isolated. Cork's underground facility continued operating flawlessly. Outside temperatures had dropped to 28 degrees, wind chills reaching levels that could cause frostbite in minutes. Inside, his climate-controlled environment preserved enough food to sustain the entire community. On the 4th morning, Malcolm arrived at Cork's property, his expensive truck struggling through snowdrifts that reached the door handles. His usual confidence was shaken, though stubborn pride remained visible as he knocked on Cork's front door. "My cattle are in trouble," Malcolm said, voice striving for authority. "Some of my grain storage is compromised, and my family may need extra supplies. I'm willing to purchase whatever you can spare." Cork studied him, recognizing genuine fear behind the bravado. "This isn't about buying and selling, Malcolm. It's about community survival." "Name your price," Malcolm pressed. "Whatever you want, I'll pay double the market rate." "You still don't understand," Cork replied calmly. "Money won't save anyone if we don't work together. The storm is expected to last another 10 days, possibly longer. Individual solutions won't work." Elena's truck pulled into the driveway, emergency veterinary equipment visible through the rear window. She had been documenting the crisis across the valley. Her expression was grim as she approached. "The Patterson family ran out of food yesterday," she said. "Old Mrs. Chen is hypothermic because her heating failed. The Kowalski children are sick from eating spoiled food after their storage shed failed. We need organized distribution, not individual deals." Malcolm's face burned with embarrassment and anger. His lifetime of community leadership had not prepared him to beg for help, especially from someone he had publicly mocked. Accepting this reality meant admitting 3 generations of farming wisdom were insufficient. "I'm not looking for charity, Brennan," Malcolm said stiffly. "This is a business transaction. I pay, you provide goods. Simple." Cork glanced toward his underground facility, then back at the man who had mocked him. "I'm willing to help, Malcolm, but when this storm ends, I want public acknowledgement that preparation and innovation aren't foolishness." Malcolm's jaw tightened. Years of pride and leadership waged war with the reality of his failing operations. "Fine, but I pay for whatever my family takes." "I won't owe you anything." Elena shook her head in frustration. "This isn't about pride or debt. Children are going hungry while you argue." Outside, the wind gusted violently, a reminder that the storm showed no signs of abating. Malcolm stood silently, vapor clouding his breath, wrestling with a decision that would define his standing in the community forever. 2 hours later, Elena returned with devastating news. 3 families had completely run out of food, and the Hendersons' elderly grandfather showed severe hypothermia. Temperatures had plunged to 35 degrees with no end in sight. Malcolm stood in Cork's kitchen, staring through frosted windows at his property across the valley. His champion cattle, worth hundreds of thousands, were struggling despite heated barns. His grain storage had suffered structural damage, and ice was destroying what remained of his feed. The Patterson children hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. Elena reported quietly. "Mrs. Chen's heating system has failed completely. She's burning furniture just to stay warm. The Kowalski family is sharing 1 can of soup among 4 people." Cork opened his laptop and showed Malcolm the weather forecast. The Arctic system was strengthening rather than weakening, with computer models predicting sustained sub-zero temperatures for at least 3 more weeks. Traditional storage methods had no chance against such conditions. "This storm is going to kill people," Cork said bluntly. "Your pride won't keep children fed or the elderly warm." Malcolm's face went pale. His grandfather had survived the brutal winter of 1978, but even that historic storm hadn't lasted this long or reached these extremes. The valley faced a survival crisis beyond anything in living memory. "What do you need from me?" Malcolm asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Public acknowledgement that you were wrong about my facility," Cork replied, "and your help coordinating distribution from your property. Your barn can safely shelter 50 people, and families need a warm place to gather for meals." Malcolm closed his eyes, wrestling with decades of family pride. The West Ridge name had symbolized successful farming in Millfield Valley for 3 generations. Admitting error publicly would damage his reputation, but refusing meant watching his neighbors suffer, or die. "The bet we made," Malcolm said slowly. "You were right about the winter. I'll honor our agreement." Elena exhaled in relief, but Cork wasn't finished. "This isn't just about our bet anymore. People's lives depend on cooperation. Are you willing to work with me to save this community?" Outside, wind howled and fresh snow began falling heavily. Emergency radio broadcast reported that major highways remained closed indefinitely. The valley would stay isolated for weeks. Malcolm straightened, extending his hand. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me prove that preparation isn't foolish," Cork replied firmly, shaking Malcolm's hand. "And help me feed every family in this valley until spring comes." For the first time in days, Elena smiled. The community's 2 most stubborn men had finally found common ground, and survival had become more important than pride. The first community meal took place in Malcolm's largest barn on the 7th day of the storm. 22 families gathered, their faces reflecting a week without proper nutrition. Children clung to parents. The elderly wrapped themselves in whatever warm clothing they could find. Cork arrived in his pickup, loaded with preserved vegetables, grains, and canned goods from his underground facility. The sight of abundant food after days of rationing brought tears to many eyes. Parents who had been giving their own portions to children finally had enough to feed everyone properly. Malcolm stood before the neighbors, voice steady, yet humble. "I owe Cork Brennan and all of you an apology. I called his underground storage foolishness, and I was completely wrong. Without his preparation and generosity, our families would be facing starvation." The crowd remained silent, absorbing the unprecedented admission from the valley's most successful rancher. Malcolm had never publicly acknowledged error in 30 years of leadership. Cork began distributing supplies methodically, ensuring each family received appropriate portions based on size and need. His underground facility held enough preserved food to sustain the entire valley for months if necessary. The innovation that had been laughed at was now their salvation. Elena organized meal preparation while documenting distribution. Every family received fresh vegetables perfectly preserved in Cork's controlled environment, along with grains and preserved meats that remained nutritious despite the harsh conditions outside. "How did you know this storm would be so severe?" asked Tom Morrison, the hardware store owner. Cork shrugged, handing Morrison's family a basket. "I didn't know for certain, but weather patterns are changing, becoming more extreme each year. Traditional storage works fine during normal winters, but normal doesn't exist anymore." Young Sarah Patterson, who hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 days, bit into a preserved apple from Cork's facility. Her smile was the first genuine happiness anyone had seen since the storm began. Other children followed suit, energy returning as proper nutrition replaced desperate rationing. Malcolm worked alongside Cork, carrying supplies and helping elderly residents access food. Serving rather than commanding marked a profound shift in the valley's social dynamics. Pride had given way to practical cooperation. "You saved us all," Malcolm said quietly as distribution ended. "We saved ourselves," Cork replied, "by working together instead of against each other." Families prepared warm meals with fresh ingredients. The barn filled with conversation and laughter for the first time in a week. Children played while adults discussed survival strategies and community cooperation. The underground facility that had been mocked was now feeding the entire valley exactly as Cork had always intended. 3 weeks later, the storm finally broke. Morning sunlight streamed across Millfield Valley for the first time in nearly a month, revealing a snow and ice-transformed landscape. Emergency crews arrived, clearing roads and restoring power. But the real transformation was in the people. Cork stood beside his underground facility, watching families emerge from Malcolm's barn, where they had been sheltering and sharing meals. Children ran through melting snow, their laughter echoing across the valley. Parents embraced, knowing their families had survived the worst winter storm in Colorado history. Malcolm approached Cork with a metal plaque, crafted during the storm's final week in his workshop. The inscription read, "Cork Brennan, the man who fed Millfield Valley." Beneath it, in smaller text, "Vision and preparation saved us all. The Valley Council voted unanimously. This goes at the entrance to your property. So everyone knows what you did for us," Malcolm said, voice free of former arrogance. Cork accepted the plaque, its weight symbolic not only of vindication, but of the community's gratitude for survival. His underground facility had provided 2,470 meals during the crisis, feeding every person without a single family going hungry. Elena joined them, her veterinary bag slung over her shoulder, preparing to check on livestock that had survived the ordeal. "The State Agriculture Department wants to study your preservation system," she told Cork. "They're calling it a model for emergency preparedness in rural communities." News crews arrived, drawn to the innovative facility that had prevented a humanitarian disaster. Cork explained his design on camera. No longer an outcast, he had become a recognized expert in agricultural adaptation. The underground barn that had once provoked laughter now drew serious attention from farming experts, emergency planners, and government officials. Orders for similar facilities poured in from Colorado and neighboring states, turning Cork's mocked innovation into a thriving business. As the sun set on their first normal evening in weeks, the community gathered again in Malcolm's barn. This time it was a celebration rather than survival. Cork provided fresh vegetables from his facility for a feast, marking both the end of the storm and the beginning of a new understanding about preparation and cooperation. Malcolm raised his glass to the crowd, to Cork Brennan, who taught us that being different isn't being foolish. "His underground barn fed us all when winter tried to break us." The crowd erupted in applause. Cork smiled, remembering the ridicule he had endured months earlier. Now the same neighbors who had mocked him celebrated his success and embraced his methods. They had laughed at his underground barn. But when winter came, it had fed the whole valley exactly as he had always believed it would.